So good afternoon, everyone. On what is so far, certainly here in the UK, the hottest day of the year so far. It's a very warm day. Everybody's looking sunny and bright. Here are my friends on the Compassion Check-in hour. And I'm just going to invite you all just to say your names because we won't, lots of people who are your fans and followers will know what you do. So if we just quickly say our names, let's go to the top of my screen is Frank.
Frank Munro, civil servant for the MOJ.
Fantastic. Next up is across the way from me is Dr. Martin.
Hello there, Dr. Martin Patrick, novelist and university employability person.
Fantastic. And next in my picture, two people for the price of one, is the wonderful Leigh and Justin. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Justin, and I'm a meditation and yoga teacher as well as an IT professional.
Wonderful. And Rob Neal, OB, is next in my picture.
No, you've missed Leigh.
Oh no, sorry, Leigh. Sorry, Leigh. I'm sorry, because I so know Leigh. Leigh, I'm in trouble. Back over to you.
No problem. It often happens to us. Our Tibetan names are Sherib and Samton, and it's just, we never even separate. It's just one thing, Sherib Samton. So it's perfectly normal. I'm Leigh. I organize events and retreats, mostly women's events. I'm collaborating with Aleksandra, who's on the call too. And I also facilitate relaxation.
Somebody's got an airplane flying above them, which is quite rare.
Concorde become airbound again.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Leigh. And next up is Rob.
Hi, everyone. Lots of love. My name's Rob Neal. I am a civil servant part-time. I'm also a consultant running my own business called Crystal Alliance, where I'm a coach and a facilitator.
Fantastic. Next up is Aleksandra.
Hello, everyone. I'm Aleksandra. I am a yoga teacher and a journalist.
Wonderful. And next up is Maya.
Hi, everyone. I'm an accountant who's having a career change, and I'm interested in health and well-being and the community.
Wonderful. Excellent. And last but by no means least so far, it's Danny. Danny, do you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Danny Silvestri, and I'm a barber who has major interest in health and well-being as well.
Wonderful. And I think we had two other people who were about to call, I think Maya and Iris K. So we will say hello to them in a minute. But our topic today is self-empowerment. Self-empowerment. Really interesting kind of topic. For me, there's two very, very strong words in there, isn't it? There's self, and then there's empowerment. Does anyone want to kind of kick off with what this means to them? And today I'm wearing, I decided today to wear my, this is my, supposed to be Oprah, my Oprah t-shirt, because I thought for me, Oprah is a really, really good example of self-empowerment. Somebody who went on this journey of self-empowerment and through that empowering others. So that was the t-shirt I decided to wear today. Anyone got any initial thoughts about what self-empowerment means for them? Who shall I turn to first? And welcome Iris, a very warm welcome to you.
Sure.
See you from the sunny Bahamas. It looks as though you're... Dr. Martin, I want to turn to you first, perhaps. Self-empowerment, what does it mean to you?
Very definitely a separation between the paid job that I do, which calls on my professional skills and my years of education training, you know, as a student coming through and coming up from, if you will, GCSE A levels up to PhD study, blah, blah. That to me is a part of my self-empowerment. Oddly enough, the job that I get paid for does not give me any sense of self-empowerment at all. When I write as a novelist, I feel immensely empowered because I feel free. My mind is free of the bureaucratic process of getting things done. And teaching in a university, when you are able to help someone to come to their understanding of their humanity and their intelligence, that I really, really do love. And I have an enormous respect for students that undertake that journey and fulfill their own path.
Really?
That I really love and that I like. What I don't like is the bureaucracy of institutions that tells you constantly that cannot be done unless, and that cannot be done under these circumstances, and so much presumption that goes into the process of not only micromanaging but sort of matrixed managing. So to me, self-empowerment is understanding who you are and how you refine and develop that, how you feed it. There's so many people who do well-being here. I don't actually have to explain how well-being feeds your sense of self-empowerment. But intellectual self-empowerment and spiritual self-empowerment and creative self-empowerment is not given to me by the work that I'm paid for, because there's just too many people in my face getting on my blasted nerves.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that you start us off there, you know, Dr. Martin. I think that many people would echo that, isn't it? It's interesting that you describe how yeah, it's a really interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I don't know who wants to kind of pick up next, but what I got a sense from you is that at various parts of your journey from studies, GCSE, right through to PhD, there's this sense of empowerment and self-empowerment, and in some of the things that you love, the novel writing, other bits of work, empowering, and times when you're doing some work where other people also come along with that sense of self-empowerment, and then how there can be other scenarios where we feel quite the opposite from feeling empowered. Who wants to jump in then next? I could see that Rob was smiling. Oh, well, you've put something in the chat box, so I'm going to hand over to you then, Rob. Anything you want to say about this thing about self-empowerment? Or you're just on mute. You're just on mute.
I'm doing too many things at once. I'm trying to get my lunch in because either side of this, I've got no time. So apologies for me eating. I am listening as I eat. I put it in the chat. What tickled me about what my brother, Dr. Martin, had to share was the phrase blasted nerves, because it's very high currency in certainly the West Indian community, but some people have been getting on my blasted nerves this week, and it really tickled me. So thank you for that, my brother. I'd written down, Rash, as is my want. I kind of leave it until this moment to ask my heart what I have to say about this. And for me, self-empowerment is permission to be, free to be. It's the talent within that's liberated and released. It releases all of who we are, not having to seek permission, being all that we can be. I'm reminded of words made famous by Nelson Mandela, but attributed and indeed written by Marianne Williamson when she talks about our deepest fear. So it liberates ourselves from our deepest fear, because rather than what the world sometimes tells us with that blasted nerves bit about us being inadequate, we are powerful beyond measure, and our self-empowerment is what liberates. Ultimately, it's what liberates others to be all that they can be.
It's really interesting that bit.
Jotting that down now.
Yeah, I mean, that's really magical, because I think one of the things that jumps out at me for me there is the thing that you said right toward the end. What resonates with me as a coach is that I often find that people often don't know, they're unaware of their magic, as I'll put it. They're very unaware of their magic. They're very unaware of that power. So it's interesting then, this thing around empowerment. I'm going to turn to Frank. Frank, you've got put your hand up, so I'm going to turn to you straight away. Yeah. I like the way that Frank's so uber polite on these things. Anyone who knows, everyone else will come, but Frank will have his hand, virtual hand raised. Frank, tell us what's your thoughts on this thing around?
For me, it's literally what I'm going through at the moment. As you all know, we've been in the ebb and flow of Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, and certainly for the civil service, it seems like it's suddenly become a thing, and so it's taken over my life, which isn't my day job. So I'm a deputy chair of the staff network, and for me, self-empowerment is about having that vision a lot of the time the day job almost has me on my knees, but I need to find that extra strength and drive and determination to go to the, you know, to pick it up and take it to the next level, because those are the things that really matter to me. I'm not sure whether I would have the same level of drive and commitment. No, I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't have the same level of drive and commitment if it wasn't something that I wasn't passionate about.
It's so interesting, this thing about self-empowerment, and already a number of times when people find themselves in an environment that isn't empowering and can be very, very, very limiting. And then what is it that one needs to do to rediscover that degree of empowerment? I'm tempted to turn to Leigh now, because I know that you're very passionate about empowerment. I know you're very passionate about female empowerment, and I wonder if even I wonder, is it the word empowerment for you? Is it what? I'd be interested in your thoughts. I'd just be interested in your thoughts generally. And is it the empowerment that's absolutely the key for you?
I've actually grappled a lot with this word in the past. When I lived in London, when I used the word self-empowerment or empowerment in any of the work that I was doing, a lot of people responded with it with quite a bit of resistance, which I found quite strange, because for me it's literally, you know, the way I see self-empowerment is, you know, if you my habit is more trying to empower others, or empower other, you know, vulnerable people in communities, or people who are the invisible givers. I like this term, invisible givers, who you never really, you don't know what they're doing, but they're doing amazing work in the background, and kind of giving them a voice, or giving them a bit of space, or a little bit of recognition. For myself, self-empowerment, I think, comes mostly through my spiritual practice, which is really something that's that gives me a lot of strength and sustenance. And I think without that resilience, I would give up easily. So I think I get a lot of nourishment from my own spiritual practice. But I think then it's very important to translate that into action, and to be able to help others to empower themselves. It's not a thing of weakness. I think often people think that if you're saying empowerment, it implies that they are weak, that they don't have any power. And I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that it's really enabling people to utilize their own power, to give themselves that, to step into their own power. It's a big topic. It's something I'm still exploring, but I think it's a very important one, especially now with all that's going on in the world. I think it's very important for people to step into their courage. So your T-shirt is absolutely right. It's the courage, and to take your power. Power isn't always going to be handed to you. You have to take your power. You have to own your power, in a sense, and that takes courage. That takes a lot of courage.
Right, and I was going to just ask, maybe what might help this conversation is, when are the moments in your life that you've taken or discovered that power? Because I wonder if sometimes that's even more powerful than this question, what is it? Because sometimes we have those moments in life, isn't it, whereby you just have this feeling, no, hang on a minute, I need to stand up, I need to speak up, or no, that's not what I want, or no, this is who I am. And this thing around self-empowerment. But anyone want to jump in there before we say anything else? I can see, Iris, you seem poised. Am I right? You seem poised. So I want to turn to you, this thing around self-empowerment.
Yeah, it's quite topical, really. So I just made a note, you know, how I would define it. It's about taking responsibility and understanding choices, and understanding that we always have choices. And making decisions with integrity and purpose, and being vulnerable but not a victim. And why that really resonates with me, this topic. So a few weeks ago, I walked out of my job without having another job. And I think that, you know, you can look at all sorts of ought, should, and, you know, what people expect, and, you know, what might be common sense. To me, that was one of the biggest moments of empowerment, that I thought, I have so much to give to the world that I will not sit in a place where I will shrivel and disappear. And can't sparkle and give to the world and be me. So
you see the smiles that people really so resonate with what you're saying. I could just see the smiles. I could just really see the smiles. Aleksandra, you perhaps had the most beaming smile at that moment. What is it that chimed with you there, and this thing about self-empowerment? Because it is deep, isn't it? There's a lot here in this thing around self-empowerment. So I'm going to perhaps turn to you next, and I might turn to then Danny, who's next door to you, and then Maya and Justin and Mia. But Aleksandra, tell us your thoughts.
So this is one of the maybe most difficult topics we discussed so far for me, and as much as I wished and I voted for it, it's something that I really dread, because it's a very, very painful topic for me, since I understood self-empowerment wrongly. Only now when Iris spoke, I kind of felt like being lifted by her courage and, you know, her voicing out how to do it properly. Because for me, self-empowerment was a sacrifice, because I always felt I have a lot of power, but I always sacrificed it so that others can shine, or for the benefit of the wholeness of the group or community. So I think I went the wrong path for a long time in my life by self-sacrificing. Because there was power, but I always thought I have to utilize it in a way that is just completely self is gone. So I just give my power to others for the greater good. So I'm only now like almost 50, like this year, and discovering the self-empowerment as not something bad, as that I have to regain this self-control over my power, because I really just give it away very easily, and I've done it many times, especially when I joined this community. I gave power to the teacher, to the community, and it was really heavily misused. So there's a lot of pain and trauma connected to self-empowerment, but I am absolutely aware that if I want to help others, I need to regain this trust in myself and in my judgment and in I have to self-empower myself so I can help others to self-empower themselves.
Dr. Martin was so moved by that. I'll let him come back in before I move to Danny.
Aleksandra, this is a very important point that you have reached of recognition, because you cannot empower yourself if you give it away. If you give away the power that you have, that helps you to sustain your life and to be of help and benefit to others, you cannot, you cannot lead them and guide them anywhere. You cannot truly be an impactful person if you give away the power you have, because individual power within an institutional and social environment is so minuscule anyway. It's built by taking the power onto yourself and sharing it with others. So I'm really glad that you recognize giving away the power that you have does not empower you at all, nor does it help to move the cause forward.
Wonderful. I'm going to turn to Danny. And it's interesting, isn't it? There's sometimes this, there's an interesting play, isn't it? That sometimes if there is this thing about you and your power, sometimes others, it can be beneficial for others not to see your power, or for you to not see it, right? It can play into others' hands sometimes very usefully for them, isn't it? That you are kind of kept down. You don't know what your magic is. You don't know what your gifts, your talents are. And Danny, I'm going to turn to you and next.
Yeah, Aleksandra and Iris, like, amazing how and what you've said. I resonate with that as well. I don't have a lot of advice to give out to the crowd here. I've just got my own experiences, and for myself, like Aleksandra, it's hard to find that self-empowerment, and especially if you haven't got or for me personally, it was if not having the right tribe around me, but not my right connections of people that had courage and confidence that I could feed from. So how was I to find my own self if I was around people that were too detrimental in my circle? So once it was so hard, and once you break away from that, you can almost find some real self-belief in there. But it's building blocks. For me, it's taken time, and it's still taking time to really find that self, to find that power. Rash you know, lots of talk around, before we can give to others, we've got to find it within ourselves. And this is a true example that a lot of us here, there's amazing people that have so much confidence and so much advice and knowledge. And then there's a few of us here that I hear from Aleksandra, who's in the almost similar position where we're still finding it, we're still trying it. And just by being on this group here and listening to everybody, it's empowering in its own right. The words courage come to mind, which we've already talked about, and the confidence, it takes a lot of confidence, and to not be a victim. So for a long time I felt I was in that stage or into a habit of being the victim or playing the victim a lot of time in my discovery of self-empowerment, which didn't serve me and it didn't serve others around me. But it's hard to break out from it. But once you do start trying to, or once you've come to the realization you have to, then it makes things start making sense, I suppose. But that's
wonderful. So I want to come to Mia, Justin, and Maya. I'm tempted. Something's telling me to go first of all to Justin first. What's your thought about this? Because I'm curious, Justin. Sometimes when people are on this journey of, you know, yoga or on the retreats and so on that you run, you know, I wonder. There's an interesting thing for me here. There's a thing about self. And there's a thing about empowerment, and there is self-empowerment. And I'm just fascinated in my mind at the moment of when people are looking for self, when they're looking for empowerment, and when they're looking for self-empowerment. I'm just curious, anything that chimes with you from the conversation so far?
I think for me, just thinking about this, I think the key aspect really, and I think this is kind of universal, is that first of all, you need a lot of self-awareness, or you need to develop some self-awareness to understand who you are, what you want, where are you lacking, where do you need to grow, and then having a big dose, and this is something we were discussing yesterday actually, about having a lot of self-honesty, so that when you switch from discovering who you are, discovering the self, to self-empowering, you don't fall into the trap of ego aggrandizement. So that's the flip side, maybe the dark side of self-empowerment, where we develop ourselves so much that we do it to the detriment of others.
I'm trying to think of somebody on the world stage that might be true for, but anyway, back over to you.
So while I think it's obviously self-empowerment is so important, I think it can only really come from a point of really self-awareness. And that self-awareness is there. I believe the self-empowerment is much more holistic, much more helpful to yourself, to develop yourself, and it should be, at least at a minimum, non-harming to others.
Wonderful.
Otherwise, you know, I think we see it. You see all these like hyper ambitious people, you know, who have a lot of self-empowerment. They take the chances, they gather the resources, they make the networks, but it can become so ambitious for their own growth that it becomes a little bit cancerous, where it kind of leeches off everything else. And this is something I think, I can speak for myself only really, but to be very aware of when you're developing the self, that you don't overdevelop it in a wrong way.
So well said. I could see that Rob really was leaning forward there and typed into the chat box. I'm going to turn to Maya first, and I'm going to turn to Mia. Maya, for you, what is self-empowerment, and what resonates with you from the conversation?
Hi there. Yeah, so I think everything resonates from the conversation in a way. For me, self-empowerment is coming back to what other people have said: permission to be yourself, and giving yourself the space to be yourself. And in relation to, I think what Frank said around work, and not necessarily always having the strength to tap into empowering yourself on certain matters that are relevant to you. It's about, I guess, for me, I think, giving myself the space to find that strength, or the silence from outside environment, so I can actually listen to you know, my inner voices, so to speak, you know, just like what resonates with me, and actually connecting with that authenticity, and recognizing that actually it's constantly changing and evolving, as and links to what Justin said around awareness, the self-awareness. The more you become aware of yourself, the more it opens up what empowerment means to you. And in terms of giving back to the community, my interests are health, well-being and community. But what I recognize is if I don't understand my own health and well-being, you know, I can't give anything to the community, but I can be a role model if I can tap into what makes me tick and what gives me the energy, you know, to align my behavior and my actions with what resonates.
Thank you. And yeah, that, I think that thing about creating that space is so resonates with me. Mia Morris, what's any thoughts on this conversation, on this thing about self-empowerment? And it is deep, isn't it? It's deep. Oh, you just need to unmute yourself. Oh, you just, I can see, Mia seems to be there with the menu. Is that a menu of food then, Mia? I'm just wondering.
That was my magic book.
Oh, right.
My thoughts were, what have I got here? Taking control, insight and hindsight. That's where it both marries up. And I like the idea of having the courage of your convictions, stepping into your power.
Yeah.
And giving power, but going for a balance.
It's really interesting that everything so far has resonated with me, and the things that Justin was saying especially resonated with me about this kind of awareness that's absolutely the key. I'm going to put you into rooms in a moment, but I remember in my life very clearly some moments of self-empowerment. I remember in the first moments in my life, I remember I was about 15 and I was in my economics class. We had two economics teachers and both had a habit of writing reams and reams of text on the blackboard, and we'd write that down. And I suddenly realized, like 1 year into the 2 year course, one of them particularly used to do that, won't name him. And I suddenly realized, I'm writing down all these things in this book and I don't understand them. I would never, ever in my life again write down anything I don't understand. And I never have since then. And I remember there was another moment when I was 17, and I decided I wasn't going to go to university. My brother immediately ahead of me had gone to university, or Polytechnic as it was, which was quite a big thing for coming from the humble backgrounds that I had come from. And so I realized I had to tell my mum, my stepdad, that I wasn't going to go to uni. And I was quite a kind of a meek, more shy kind of person in a way. But I was so clear that it became clear to me, so to have that conversation, the courage came with it. So sometimes I think that sometimes when you become so aware, in some of those moments, the courage that is needed arrives in that very moment of that self-empowerment. It's very close to self-realization, because there is a realization. And I remember another moment in a job that somebody asked me to do a more senior job. I wasn't sure I had the confidence to it because I hadn't gone to university, other people had. And I realized I had a voice in my own voice. Who was it talking about the inner voice? Was it, well, I think it was Amaya was talking about the inner voice. And I heard a voice in my head, my own voice saying, Rasheed, you've got people skills. If you've got people skills, you can do anything. So there's something here about that being still and silent and trusting, deeply trusting. And sometimes it will be, and I so resonate with what you were saying, Iris, sometimes all the evidence is pointing in a different direction, isn't it? But it doesn't matter, because I think that those times, often you're so clear, right? You know, you're just so clear it's about that. But I think it is about us owning it. And I do think there's something about, and I resonate with what you're saying, Aleksandra. I think that sometimes, I think a lot of the time, we've actually got, again, as that wonderful piece of poetry that Rob reminded us, often it's that we have immense power. And I think a lot of the time it's that saying also, isn't it? That power doesn't always reside where you think it is. Power is often lent. It's funny that I'm not going to talk about politics. The current Prime Minister talked about that at lending, that people lent whatever. He's right. He should remember that. That thing about, you know, stuff being that lent. But I think it's interesting how often we've not paused to think, am I consciously happy for that person to have that power? Or is it best that it stays either in this space here or that I reclaim it for myself? So I'm going to invite you maybe into your rooms now to maybe share a moment, just very, very briefly. Let's share the moments where you realized your power. It might even be a brief moment. You know, it might be a brief moment, but I'm just going to give you about 5 or 6 minutes in your wonderful rooms. You don't even know who you're going to be in your room with yet, and the rooms have now magically opened. I know this is an exciting moment, isn't it? Who are you going to be in a room with today? Let's see. Wonderful, wonderful. And let's see. Oh, there you go. So I've sent them all into their rooms. This is a really interesting conversation, isn't it, around self-empowerment? It's deep, as we've heard. You know, we've heard from lots of people the times when they felt very unempowered, disempowered. But it is interesting, isn't it, this thing about self-empowered. Maybe whilst they're there in these rooms, I want to ask a little bit about, you know, what is self? What do we mean by self? What are we talking about? Is it the identity that I've been told? It's like that wonderful saying, isn't it? The unexamined life isn't worth living. Have I examined to look at who is this that I am? And what is this self? Who am I? What is resonating for me? Do I have a voice? Do I have power? That awareness thing that Justin was saying, I thought was so rich and so powerful here. Let's see who's in what room. Shall we find out? I'm going to share with you. So the rooms where we've got Danny, Leigh and Mia in a room. Oh, this will be very interesting. Very interesting. We've got Aleksandra, Dr. Martin and Iris. And then we've got Frank, Maya and Rob. So really, really interesting groups. We've got Frank, Maya and Rob in one room. We've got Iris, Dr. Martin and Aleksandra in another room. And I'm going to send them a message. Let me ask them this question. I'm going to quickly message them. Please ensure everyone speaks quite concise. I'm going to send them another message, which is 3 minutes left. Perhaps briefly share. I'm going to ask them to briefly share what's the courage that they are overlooking or they're underplaying. Briefly. The power. What's the power that you have that you are overlooking or underplaying? I find this all the time as a coach. Overlooking or underplaying. And I think that's the question I want to hear back from when they come back. What is that power that they are overlooking or underplaying? What about yourself? Do you feel self-empowered? Do you feel disempowered at work, at home? What is the, where are you at? Where do you need to claw back power? Who has the power in your life? Have they seized it? Have they claimed it? Is it because nobody else has stepped up? What are those circumstances? And how do you see yourself? Is it a moment of you stepping further forward and self-empowering yourself? It's really interesting, this one, isn't it? It's, yeah, it's really, really interesting. I think that for me, a lot of it is that thing, I think tying with what one of the things that Maya was saying, a lot of it is about listening to my own voice, my own inner voice, being still enough. I think there was that thing, I think Danny was talking about who the people who are around us. And, you know, sometimes if we don't have that network, it can be more tricky. that whole thing around self-empowerment. But it's yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. I'm really looking forward to hearing what they've got to say. I mean, it's a very powerful thing when you find it. But again, that thing that Justin was saying, that to not let it slip into this huge ego, or the self-aggrandizement, or where I lose this sense of who I am, or or I disempower others, and I really use it very in a way which is very, very cold and very limiting for others. So yeah, it's very interesting for me what everybody's going to come back and say. I'm just fascinated. Let's tell them that they have 1 minute. 1 minute. Oh, 1 minute warning, then we can bring them back. I just kind of feel the timing. So what struck you from this conversation today? And is there anything you wanted to do or shift based on it? I'm going to start to close all these rooms now. Let's close the rooms. They've got 60 seconds. They've just been told. I love this when it tells them that they've got 60 seconds. And yeah, let's see what comes up. And I'm hoping I did give them the right 3 minutes. I may have jumped from 3 minutes suddenly to 2 and to 1, but let's see what they come back and say. They've got 39, 38 seconds left. Very powerful what Iris was saying. Sometimes we feel that we're in a situation, don't we? And we might feel that we've got not power, but very often we still do have power. And sometimes it's about the power to do something, but sometimes it's the power about not doing something. What about me not doing that thing at that moment? Sometimes that can be powerful too. You know what I mean? To pause, to not make a decision, to not react, to not respond can be a sign of self-empowerment as much as to actually act. They're taking every last minute. Oh, my friends are back here. I love the fact that you're taking every last minute, every last second. Oh, wonderful. Good to see you all back. Oh, Mia, yeah, you just need to unmute yourself, so I'm going to bring you straight in, Mia. Oh, Mia, oh yeah, go Mia.
Yeah, we've got to interrupt this advert to sing happy birthday to Rasheed, who celebrated on Sunday. So happy birthday, Rasheed.
It's been very, very recent, but the actual day is a trade secret, but thank you. I'm really touched. The being lovely best wishes. Thank you so much.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. I'm really, really grateful.
So Rasheed, are you like the Queen? You've got 2 birthdays?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. That might account for, that might also account for my, I'm not going to talk about anything about my age.
Rasheed,
so anyway,
wasn't it Sunday?
It was recently.
Oh, I thought you were 50 on Sunday.
I know, it's the big one, isn't it?
Yeah, 50. I thought it was 50 on Sunday, no?
We're now back to your own self-empowerment. So with that, no, but I'm really, really deeply touched. But I'm really interested in the second. Well, I'm interested in both points. That when we found that power, but also crucially, what's the power that we need to claw back? Anyone want to come in? I want to just. I kind of almost want to jump to what's the power you want to claw back. I'm going to turn first of all to. I'm going to turn to you, Aleksandra. So, tell me, what's your feeling about that? Because I think the thing is, I almost got the thing that there's this realization that there is this power. There's this power, and that must be really exciting when one kind of discovers that. So tell me anything about how you're going to bring it back and use it, because that's quite exciting, right?
We had very, very nice discussion, Iris and Dr. Martin, and what Dr. Martin said really inspired me. I also read a book yesterday, and so he talked about love, how love at the age of 20 changed him. It gave him power and self-empowerment. And I think this is a time for me to not maybe to be expecting other people to love me, but to love myself So it's self-love, just like what Maya talked before about the space and just taking time about our well-being, what nurtures us. Because I just always give up the appointments that are just for me. I do what I have to do, but I never do what's really like. I teach yoga, but I don't do yoga myself, although it means so much to me because I just have to do, I think, other things for other people. So I think this session is going to make a change for me, and I'm making promise, and I in front of you that I will really gain power and give power to myself by self-loving myself, because I know where my power lies and it's needed. My power is needed in the world. So it's also my responsibility to self-love myself, take care of myself so I can empower others.
Wonderful. I think that's so true, because I think that in that realization that, I mean, that when I do that, I can do what I'm doing even more richly, even more sustainably. It's wonderful, really, really wonderful. Leigh, I can see you smiling there, so I'm going to bring you in at that moment.
I think I just wanted to really comment on what Aleksandra said. Really, it just makes me so happy, you know, when people, you know, kind of step into their own power again. I don't think it's ever really lost. I think things just go into a dormant state. And, you know, just personally for me, I've also had a very, very challenging life since a very young age. Sometimes if I look back at it, it doesn't really seem like it was my life. It just seems like some kind of story. But it's I think the humility is always for me the thing that I always come back to, that it's, you know, and you are not defined by, you know, by the experiences before, because you are reborn every single day, and you can recreate yourself every single day, even though we all have a lot of baggage and we all have a lot of history. That's actually, I just really see that as the fuel and the fodder. You know, my project that I started is called Red Lotus, and lotus in Asian spiritual tradition has a very big symbolism of this beautiful pure flower that comes through the mud or through the dirt or through the manure, really, of life, but it comes up as this really pure and pristine, very tender kind of beautiful flower. And I think that's, you know, that's how we all have the potential to be, is to you know, we work with what we have. You work with that manure of life and you turn it into something beautiful.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. Who wants to come back in next? Who wants to share next? Who wants to? So Danny, I'm going to bring you in, because you were talking about, actually, because you had been talking about this thing about, I guess, this journey, I guess it is of self-empowerment, to re-empower yourself. So where are you at with all of this stuff now? And what is that power to reclaim?
Being on these calls, meeting like-minded people like everybody here is empowering. It's like Aleksandra was saying, it's every time I'm looking deeper, I'm finding more empowerment. So it's a continual journey to do that, and to grow up and to learn and to want to learn. I just touched at the end that sometimes all these sort of self-awareness journeys I've been on, it's come to almost like, you know, felt that I've got to realize I need the help before it comes. So it's almost like an addict for me. It's like, if I've been I've had in my family some people that have been had really tough times with drugs, and they've been an addict, and it's almost until they realize that they need that help and that they are going to look for it, they're not going to really get out of the rut they're stuck in. And some people don't need it, but if you feel like you need to find something, it's just a case of keep looking, keep searching, keep asking questions. And I think I'm just going to continue doing that for my way of moving forward, and hopefully become as wise and as much wisdom as you guys have been able to offer, I can offer to people, you know, elsewhere as well. Yeah.
Speaking of wise people, Rob Neal. So Rob, for you, this thing, because I mean, it's interesting. If I may, I think that you're somebody who's very aware of power. I think you're somebody who's very aware of it, and I think you're very aware of where where there's injustice. And I think that you're one who's really one for helping others to empower themselves. So I'm really interested in your take on this because I bet you see it so often. I just, I'm sure you could write several books around this. So I'd love to know where you are with all of this right now.
Thank you for that, Rash, and very keenly observed. It's true. I am in touch with, I guess the word is power, and how things get done, and also how things don't get done. When you serve for as long as I have as a civil servant, you learn how legislation is passed. You learn how legislation gets kicked into the long grass. Yes, Minister isn't the top-selling comedy series that it is for no good reason. It is what it is because it's based on truth and fact, and many of us in this call will know that happens. I think I can remember as a teenager wanting to be a police officer. Something there about power, isn't there? But that was my ambition. When I realized I was never going to be good enough at football to play on the grass and do something that I laughed as I did, I wanted to be a police officer. Why? Because I wanted to work in the community to prevent bad things from happening and encourage the community to help police itself. That was my ambition. And when that didn't work out for all sorts of reasons, I went to what I thought at the time, age 19, was the best next thing. And then my motivation was my godmother, God bless her soul, Naomi, Auntie Naomi. She had gone to the local courthouse to have a document sealed and sworn. It's a procedure. You have to get it officially sworn. And she was getting her affidavit sworn. She returned to my place, my home, to speak with her sister, my mum, and they were having a conversation in the kitchen, and I was eavesdropping. And I remember my godmother saying to my mum that she was petrified in the courthouse. And the reason she was petrified was because she realized and recognized the language vaguely as English, but she couldn't understand what all of the people were saying. This sea of white faces. Now we're going back 30 odd, nearly 31, 32, coming on for nearly 40 years actually. And it dawned on me then in that very moment that what I could do as someone that could understand patois, that could speak fluently on the island of Jamaica, for example, but I could break that down and put myself in that situation and translate. And the power to do that would be with me. So I could sit here and listen to that conversation and help Auntie Naomi and Uncle Jasper and Uncle Lanzi and Auntie Mabel and say, look, bring me the affidavit here. When the affidavit come, we will stamp it for you. And we will take it back home and you have no problem at all. But come to me and I will have it sealed by the judge. And your process, you will be empowered. You will be able and enabled to do what you need to do next in the process. And because at that time, we're going back to the early 80s, there were very few, very, very few people from African or West Indian descent working in the civil service. Indeed, you rewind the clock about 15 years before that, and someone like me couldn't work in the civil service. Why? Because my parents were born in a country other than England. That's how recent we're talking about. So fast forward to the present day, Black Lives Matter. It's a huge issue still. And so the power that I have as a Black man working in England with an eye on the rest of the world to really understand what I harness as an ability to help. And I love what Justin said earlier. I just want to touch on that. Thank you, Justin. I love you to the bone for sharing that piece around self-awareness and the safeguards in place about self-regulation and motivation and empathy. And of course, as we demonstrate here in these compassion check-ins, our social skill, our ability to connect with one another, to understand and hear from one another so that we can be the best we can be in this world and to welcome the best in everyone that we meet.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So powerfully said. And very powerful, that example of when one realized one's own power very early on in life. It makes me very much think of, and I just want to mention it here very briefly before, and because you mentioned Justin, I'm going to bring you in there.
Rasheed,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt your flow. Can I invite Maya to come in
Please.
If she's minded to. Maya, you said something that was precious, I thought, around ego, and right at the tail end of our chat with me, you and Frank. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I wondered whether you wanted to say something about that.
Yeah, I think I was linking it to what Justin said about self-awareness, and you know, and as part of self-awareness, I think not being caught up in your ego, and I think that specifically linked to empowerment is also about listening to other people's thoughts and views as well. So moving away from ego and connecting more with sense of self in the community and the crowd. So self versus ego. So they're both kind of connected to us as individuals, but ego can be more linked to the marketing and less to do with humility, whereas the sense of self is more around listening to yourself and sharing from a place of humbleness.
Wow.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
I mean, how beautiful is that? How beautiful is that?
That's really beautiful. I think also it brings in for me this thing about self as well. I know we've talked a lot about the empowerment, but part of the challenge here is even this word self. What do I mean when I'm talking about myself? Is it this idea of me that somebody else has told me that who I am and what I am? Because there can be a lot of wrestling with that. So what is this self that I'm talking about? But then within that, then when I discover myself, maybe with a soft heart, then I realize that localized this me has some power and some gifts and some ability to do things and to share. I'm about to bring in Justin, but I can see Iris. Iris, you seem to be just beautifully kind of just reflecting. So I want to bring you in that moment. There was lovely expression on your face. I want to bring you in at that moment.
Yeah, excuse Henry, he's twittering away in the background. Yeah, I think for me, the discovery of self is very closely related to discovering how much we are all part of the whole, and the connectedness of humanity. And without that, actually, self in isolation is, and I think that's in our. And it's a cultural thing as well, I think, how we are brought up to define self. And I find very interesting when you live in different countries, how people introduce themselves and what they tell each other as part of small talk to introduce themselves. I find it ever so fascinating. And I found when I came to England, people talk a lot about their work, where they work. Whereas in Germany, people will talk a lot about what fancy hobbies and things they do. So it's actually a lot of external artificial things that have nothing to do with who we are as part of humanity and nature and spiritual beings, and that we are actually more spiritual beings than the physical part that just wanders the world and tries to fit in, and it's shaped by a temporary culture where we just live.
Wonderful. I think that's so well said. And whilst you're saying that, I'm going to hand over to Justin, but I'm just going to type in the details of our We All mini taster retreat this weekend, which is a lot about this. How can I find my own power? How can I really connect to the we, be it how I identify myself, my gender, my class, my color, my creed, my family, but also what about the sense of all? Justin, over to you.
I don't really know what else to add, or if I have anything to add, but just reflecting, I feel that, this sense of self-empowerment or taking control of what you can control, or understanding what you can't control. I think in one way it's so revolutionary when we have it, but on the other hand, it's something very sober and down to earth at the same time. It's about recognizing, who you are and what it is that you need, and then understanding that often a lot of these self-empowerment things, or whatever we do to empower ourselves, often are very small behavioral or mind changes rather than I went and got a university degree. It's more the fact that I decided I needed to improve myself. Or it's not that you moved into self-empowerment. It's not that, you know, I moved into a giant flat, you know, with all glass windows and, you know, looking over the river. It's rather that I decided I needed to what. And I think that is always, when it's coming from an kind of an honest place or an aware place, it's always something very down to earth.
I love that, because for me, what I'm hearing, the music of what you're saying, for me, this sense of who I am and my worth, because I think that links it. When it's discovered, it's subtle, but it's profound, it's potent, because then you don't do all this in the breeze. You know who you are. So what other people may think about you is of no consequence. Exactly. And I think that so we spend too much time being remotely. I have a saying, care about people, yes. Care about how people feel, certainly. But care about what people think, beware. Care about people, yes. Care about how people feel, certainly. But care about what people think, beware. Who on earth would want to care about what somebody thinks? What people think is what somebody's been conditioned to think. It's inconsequential. What they're telling you that they think isn't necessarily what they really think. It's based on so many things. It will change by the end of the afternoon. Who in their right mind would be interested in what somebody thinks? It's absurd. Dr. Martin, over to you.
Yes, I remember, I don't know if I read it, I don't know if I dreamt it, but it was a point of awareness. When I realized that I used to look up to people and now I look into them.
Beautiful, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. I love that. I love that.
That truly means that your humanity and mine, I'm looking for the connection between both things, because in order for you to discover my truth and in order for me to understand your truth, it is your humanity and your spirit and your intelligence. That's why I love you. If you're a fool, you will be gone faster than I can snap my fingers. I don't admire or have any time for ignorance. That is what I call village philosophies. Well, I know what I know. It's like, but you've never left the village of 100 people, and so what you know is incredibly limited. You need to move beyond that. So the people that I used to admire and the people that I still admire, I do look up to them, but to live and grow and find empowerment, self-empowerment, and the value of your own humanity, it means you have to look into things. You have to understand how that gives your life value and how you then share that with the people that you come into contact with. Because if you do that, people will know it. They'll know it very, very quickly that you're someone that shares rather than someone that takes.
Beautifully said. I'm going to bring in Frank and then Maya, and I'm going to get you to then all begin to think about just the one word perhaps that you're going to carry away with you. Frank, because I could see that really resonated with you. Over to you.
Well, I'm kind of speechless now, actually, because it did resonate with me to that extent. No, I got nothing.
Just beautiful, because sometimes that's it.
I couldn't have articulated it better. I'm not going to pay, no. Beautiful. Thank you.
And also, yeah.
No, what flowed into my mind and heart as Dr. Martin spoke was something I take from Eric Burns' book, The Games People Play. And he talks about, doesn't he, in transactional analysis, he talks about, the child, the parent, and the adult. And actually, oftentimes when we're looking up or looking down, we're occupying the place of the child or parent. And that really what we do as we mature and what we look for is an adult-to-adult relationship and conversation and discussion. And so that looking into comes from those vantage points when it's an adult to an adult, and we're not trying to either score points or defend our position. And I think coming right back, and because it occupies so much of my time is why I use it as an example, Rasheed. It can be used as an example in other spaces and with other things. But when we look at the perfect storm that's in play right now with George Floyd's public murder, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the lockdown, the serious front room, I think what many people are finding is that it puts a greater emphasis and a greater focus on the nature of those relationships and brings it into focus, whether it be, you know, child to parent, parent to adult, adult to parent. And what we're trying to get to, particularly if we're having open discussions, honest discussions about delivering on something as important as race equality, is that adult to adult conversation. How can we look into each other to really understand our present position?
I like that. And actually what resonates with me with that, and I wonder with that quote, what it points to me is actually a soul to soul conversation. It's actually soul to soul, because sometimes all of this stuff about how people perceive themselves, it's all just flowing in the wind.
Yeah.
The wonderful Mia Morris, thank you. The wonderful Mia Morris. Mia, anything that you want to say as then we begin to wrap up?
It's the tail end of that quote from Michelle Obama, where she talks about success and talks about the difference that you make in people's lives. And as long as we're striving to make a difference to other people as opposed to ourselves, we should do it.
It's a lovely moment because it takes it out from then the me to the we. I'm just going to invite you all to maybe just say one word that you're going to take away, maybe an affirmation to yourself or commitment to yourself. Let's start off here with Maya. Maya, what's you know, just in a word or you know, or a sentence, what is it you're going to take away from today?
More soul to soul conversations.
Love it. Danny Silvestri, my friend, what are you going to take away from today?
To go and definitely read the Eric Berne book, because I have had that explained to me before in some therapy, and I didn't know where it came from. So thank you, Rob, for sharing that to me. I'm going to go and have a good read of that because I find that really interesting and super important.
Beautiful. Aleksandra, over to you.
Or reflection and self-dedication, or dedication to myself in a positive way, not in growing my ego.
I think it's so wonderful. I have to just say, you know, I have to say it because I always give people, I often give people feedback. Seeing just some of the things that you've done on social media, I can't begin to imagine that when you then embrace so much of this stuff for yourself, and then from then it goes out, I can't begin to imagine what you will achieve from that space. I think it will be just really, really, really remarkable that everything will grow in absolutely everything direction. It's an impossibility for it not to, because that's the space that you're coming from. Rob.
Wow.
I've never seen you speak. I have never seen you stuck for words. Rob Neal, OBE. My goodness.
I'm just bathing and soaking in what has been said. I'm now in love with Justin. I just want to take his words from earlier and just bathe in those. I just want to soak in that whole, what he's brought to the fore of my mind is this self-awareness and how we can continue to carry that with us and nurture that heightened sense of self-awareness. I think there's all those other things that come around it, but that for me is key.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I think with the work that you're doing, I know around this thing about compassionate leadership, I just have to say this. So many people are hurting and traumatized. So that the awareness is absolutely key for a place of real heart to be able to permeate. And often people don't want to hear heart when there's being hurt, but heart is the only thing that can heal. Courage is very, very important for us to go into that space, but that heart does the healing. So I think that as you bring that into that space, as well as all the awareness and that courage that you bring, that fight, which is so important, also the fire of that, the transformational fire, I think that will be very, very powerful, but to be able to take heart also and to re-find and rediscover heart. So that's really, really beautiful. Dr. Martin, what in just a word, a couple of, or a sentence, what will you be taking away, having brought so much to today?
I think it is vitally important to remember that you don't lose your spirit. You have to keep your spirit buoyant and to share. And when you are sharing, this should affirm your self-love, because if you don't love yourself, then there's very little you can achieve. The world that we live in does not, and especially for a black man, we are not given self-love. We are not given love. We actually have to work on it and develop it. And it's only when we do that, it's only when we learn how to love, that is when we become magnificent.
Wonderful, 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 beautiful. Mia Morris, OBE.
Okay. Increasing my confidence and hope springs eternal.
Beautiful, beautiful. Justin and then Leigh, in this wonderful square here, are two magnificent people. Over to yourselves.
I think for me, maybe the word is courage to do. Sometimes I'm a little bit uncomfortable.
I think I really resonated with what Dr. Martin said about, seeing into people, and it reminded me of a little phrase that I had stuck on my notebook for many years. I probably still have it somewhere, and it just says meditate on truth, not for it. And that was something that, there's just such a shift there with awakening the wisdom within.
Very nice.
Beautifully said. Frank Munro.
Hi. I just want to go back to Mia Morris's original point when she was talking about building to make a difference. To that, I would just add one word: positive difference, because in the current climate, there's the potential for so many people to make that positive difference for the benefit of everybody.
Wonderful. And last but by no means least, Iris.
I don't find a word. I don't know. I think I just came to realise as part of some of the conversations that I still annoyingly have the temptation to give power away, and then emotionally, physically, spiritually suffer before I take it back. So maybe the word is really about awareness, discipline, consistency, something like that.
Wonderful. And just to say, Iris, if you can, and to everyone here, if you're free on Saturday between 12 noon and 1:30, join us for I, We, All, where we're going on this journey from the I to the we to the all. It would be magnificent to have some of your energy there. But this conversation today has been one of my, each time I'm like, oh, this has been my favorite conversation, but this one's been very, 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 very rich, very, very, very potent. I just want to thank you all so much. It's been really very, 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 very special. Two songs come to mind just before, as we leave. One a joyful one, and one of potent power. Labi Siffre, Something Inside So Strong. I remember hearing that when I was a kid, during that, the anti-apartheid side. And I, wow, I didn't realize the song could be so powerful. And the other one is Matthew Wilder's Never Gonna Break My Stride, which just is, if anyone knows that, look it up afterward. It's just so upbeat and just cheerful. It just is joyful, joyous. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with those two songs, but I just want to thank everyone so much for being here today. Thank you all, my wonderful friends. And I hope you've enjoyed listening to today, and I'm going to stop the recording now. If you all want to wave, all want to wave, let's say a quick wave and bye-bye.